Thank you, everybody here, for bringing me here and bringing the film here. The film is called Carbon Nation, and our tagline is a climate change solutions movie that doesn't even care if you believe in climate change. Now, let's jump right to my hat. I don't wear baseball caps. Can everyone see the hat and read the hat? Did you have thoughts about the hat when I put it on? Well, a week ago tonight, I was getting myself into Arkadelphia, Arkansas, and for the reason to film them, because the only police department in the United States that is a hybrid patrol car fleet is Arkadelphia, Arkansas. So the concept or the idea that climate change solutions or clean energy or things like that only exists where we expect it to is just simply wrong, which is good news, really good news. So what happened in Arkadelphia? The town manager had the idea, we have 16 patrol cars, 10,000 people, 50 miles of roads. We need to save money. So we know we're going to be cycling out our Crown Victorias. So we have enough money for 10 new cars this first round, which was 3 years ago. Let's go ahead and get hybrids. So he went to the chief of police and said, I'd like you to think about getting hybrids. And the chief of police thought he was nuts, thought he was joking, and wouldn't talk to him about it at all. So the town manager just kept going after him and going after him. And then finally he said, tell you what, why don't you, chief of police, come with me, town manager, to Hot Springs, Arkansas, and we'll test drive one. We'll test drive a hybrid and see what you think. So they went up to Hot Springs, went to the Toyota dealership. They looked at a Prius, and the chief of police basically said, hell no, can't do that. And then the town manager said, well, here, try the Camry. Same size as a patrol car, give it a shot. Chief of police gets in the car, floors it, and goes, oh, this is pretty fast. Okay, conversation started. They bought them, and the mileage for the guys who are driving the hybrids is twice as much. So as opposed to 12, 13, 14 miles per gallon that they're getting on the Crown Vics, they're getting 27, 28, and the one cop who was really into it got 30. They saved enough money to give raises to 100 people who work for the city. They saved enough money to do a lot more patrolling, and that guy who got 30 miles to the gallon was doing 200 miles a shift in a 12-hour shift. They have 50 miles of road, which means he's covering every road 4 times. So they can't say that crime has gone down, but what they're wondering is they have the data, they haven't crunched it yet, but usually in a downturn these last 3 years, crime goes way up, and their crime has not gone way up. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say there's a connection there. And so that's what I did last Monday and Tuesday, because we are going to continue filming Carbon Nation. It's Carbon Nation Mach 2 is the working title. And I'll be based out of Arizona State University at the School of Sustainability and the Cronkite School of Journalism. How many people here have heard of ASU and the sustainability work? Yeah, they do a good job. I'm very excited to be there, and I'd like to invite everybody here to come out there, because I think it'd be very, very cool. I know one person in the room has seen this clip, so Bob, my apologies. And we're going to show a clip here. Basically, when we set out to make Carbon Nation, we didn't want to make a film that was just for us, the filmmakers who cared about climate change. Plus, in 2007, we were under the impression that climate change, the argument of whether it was real or not, was done. We thought, in a naive way, we don't have to prove climate change in our movie because the argument's done. So that's what we set out to do. And here's someone we found along the way up in Alaska.
Alaska has more geothermal energy than all the states put together. But yet Chena Hot Springs is the first geothermal power plant in the state of Alaska. Now this power plant is making power off of water that's not as hot as McDonald's coffee.
We developed lower temperature technology, so you don't have to go after 300 or 400 degree water or steam.
This is working. We're doing it. I mean, The lights are on right now geothermally. Now we're going to enter the largest ice structure in the world to be up all summer. Now Forbes magazine voted this the dumbest business idea of the year. Mr. Forbes can kiss my ass. This entire structure is kept cold geothermally. It cost me about $12 a day to refrigerate this place. If you did it on diesel fuel standard, it would be $750 a day. It's the cheapest thing going. Our electricity was costing us 30 cents a kW. Right now, we're at 5 cents a kW. In 3 to 4 years, we'll be 1 penny per kilowatt hour. We'll have the cheapest energy in the state of Alaska. People say, where do you stand on global warming? Do I think man is causing global warming? I think that we add to it. Do I think we're causing it? No. But that doesn't make any difference. I want clean water and I want clean air. And that's so simple.
The reason I asked Bernie whether he thought climate change was man-made or not is because I saw a picture of him with George Bush in his office, George W. Bush. So I thought I would test the political idea. And when he said that, my first reaction was I was bummed out. I was kind of pissed and irked. How can you not know climate change is real and happening and we're causing it? And then it just hit me. Does it really matter if he's doing everything he's doing, which he's not doing it to solve climate change, but what he's going to do will be a big part of solving climate change? Because he's revolutionizing low-temperature geothermal power. So let me give you some scale. Every oil well that's drilled, about 95% of the stuff that comes out is water that's about 200 degrees. Right now, that's a nuisance for the oil companies, and they have to spend energy to pump it back into the ground. If you put one of Bernie's units on top of that oil well, capture the heat from that 200-degree water, you would produce electricity. And every oil well is on the grid, so you don't have to bring in new transmission lines. In Texas alone, there's about 250,000 oil wells. There's actually going to be a lot more because they're doing enhanced recovery right now. If you put one of those units on every one of those oil wells, you would have the amount of power to equal 10 medium-sized nuclear power plants. And so Bernie's idea is let's work with the oil companies because they know drilling, they know the earth very well. We might have disagreements on how they're using the earth, but they know it. So his game is, he's the biggest, we have a little thing in the film where we show little pieces of people's bios, and he calls himself the biggest development SOB there is. He wants to work with the oil companies, and that's his game. And the downturn did affect him, so we're keeping an eye on things as we rev up. So my Uncle Phil sent me, mostly his college roommate, they were Harvard class of '54, they both sent me climate denier articles the whole time I was shooting the movie. It really bummed me out at first until, again, I realized they're making sure I keep them in mind as I'm making the movie. And from what I understand from all the work I've studied and everything, all the people I've studied and all the studying we've done, we need all hands on deck. And the good news is all hands can be on deck for their own reasons, and we're all going to get there in the same direction, just for different reasons. I'll give you an example. I was on a flight I live in Louisville, and I'm getting ready to move to Phoenix if we can find a house that passes inspection. And I was on a flight from Louisville to Denver, on the phone, yakking. They tell us to turn off the phones. Guy sits down next to me and says, "Oh, you've made a movie." I said, "Yeah, I've made a movie. It's about solutions to climate change." And he says, "You and I are going to disagree about everything." I said, "Fair enough." I usually don't talk to people on planes. I never talk to people on planes. I have Bose headphones, I have books, I have my computer. I've learned how to sleep on flights. But this guy intrigued me. So we started talking. And very quickly, we figured out who voted for Reagan and who didn't. And we figured out, he told me he was Tea Party. I was like, okay, fine. And I said, if you're Tea Party, that means you don't want big government. He said, yeah, absolutely not. Get the government out of everything. I said, well, what did you think of the Gulf War? Of the Iraqi War and the Afghanistan War. What did you think of the Iraq War? Let's just talk about that. He goes, well, it was actually a really big mistake. I didn't support it. said, did you tell anyone that you weren't supporting it when things were happening and you could have done something? He goes, no, I didn't. I said, then you just missed a huge opportunity to be an American and say what you thought when it would have mattered. And he hadn't thought things through like that. Just hadn't crossed his mind. And we got to talking about how we would tax, how much we would tax, and how we would spend the tax money, basically governing. And in a nutshell, we agreed on about 75% of how we would run this country. This guy who's supposed to hate everything I'm saying, I'm supposed to hate everything he's saying, we're supposed to be a polarized country. And both of our jaws dropped. We couldn't believe it. And we kept in touch. I gave him a copy of my film. I said, please watch this. I really want to know what you think. I really want to know what you think. And about 2 months later, he's a UPS pilot. And about 2 months later, that UPS plane went down in the Middle East with the batteries that caught on fire. So I emailed him to say, hey, are you okay? And did you know anybody? And it turns out a good friend of his was one of those pilots. And so I sent my condolences, and I think that got him to thinking about the movie. So he watched it, and he texted me back and said, thank you for this film. You're not blaming me. You're not talking politics. Al Gore's not in it. And I really learned a lot in your movie. And you won't believe it, but as soon as I saw your film, I got paired with UPS's most fuel-efficient pilot. He said, before I saw your film, I wouldn't have cared. I would have wondered why the guy was trying to save the man money. And now, he said to me, I'm studying this guy. And the way the guy does save money a lot is how he hits the jet streams going in and out of him, and Boeing has been studying him and these techniques, and now it's actually becoming part of the way to fly. So now this guy who I met on the plane, who's supposed to, we were supposed to disagree about everything, wants to be UPS's most fuel-efficient pilot. And I still don't know whether he thinks humans are causing climate change or not. But I know he still wants something that I want for his own reasons, which I'm very happy about. Small note on that conversation. We talked the entire way. We talked all the way from Louisville to Denver and into the gate. The second time I've had a conversation on a plane in the last 3 years was Friday, flying from Phoenix back to Louisville. And I'm talking to a guy, and I bring up this story because they're asking me what I do. This guy's a roofer. I'm like, are you using white roofs? Are you? And he's like, yeah, we are. And I was like, how do you know somebody? He was behind me on that flight. And he thought, at some points, he thought this guy and I were going to get a little fisty. But he talked to his wife after that flight about the conversation this guy and I had 3 years ago. Second conversation I have is with the guy who was right behind us. So that was kind of cool. And again, it was people who weren't really with me politically at all. But they got the idea of business. They got the idea of saving money. They got the idea of waste. And back in Arkadelphia, there's one cop who's been there the longest. He's the Sarge. He gets gold letters on his cap. And he just won't drive a Camry if he has anything to say about it. He's not going to drive a Camry. And so then the young cop who I was riding around with had a Camry, so he's flying all over town with me, and I'm filming and all that stuff. So then the two of them say, hey, let's film tomorrow. So what I didn't realize was they were setting up their own stunt driving for me, and they didn't tell their boss. So we go out to this park with these S-turns, and they're flying by me, having a blast, sirens blasting, super dangerous, really pushing it. And afterwards, he had to say, he's like, God, I couldn't catch the Camry around a couple of those turns, right? And then he was telling me afterwards, this was sort of late in the interviewing, I'm just sitting in the Camry, and he comes up to the window, and he says, you know what? Forget the Camry here at work, but if I could find a car that saves me gas mileage at home, I'm there. So even a guy who's on camera saying he doesn't want to drive a Camry for work wants to save gas money at home. So it is really, for me, what I've discovered is it really is about money for a lot of people. It's about money. And the good news is there's a lot of money in the solutions. Jonathan told me a story. Tell me if I've changed it since you told it to me, okay? Because we want to hear stories out here, but I'm going to tell your story. Columbia University Hospital up in Harlem was collecting enough data that they could see where their emergency room visits were coming from. And they had this one building that was producing enormous amounts of asthma attacks. So far, so good? Let's have you tell it. Let's have you tell it, because this is what we're going to do. We're going to open this up. So I don't know where that mic is. Oh, cool. It's a great story.
So low-income people who live in low-income communities are much more vulnerable to diseases and are much more impacted by things such as asthma, which come from bus diesel fumes and many other things. And the Columbia Presbyterian Hospital, which is in Upper Harlem, was noting that, like all hospitals that serve poor people around America, how many cases of asthma attack they had. And they tried all the normal medicine solutions. So more and more inhalers, higher and higher prescriptions, and it wasn't solving the problem. And somebody got the bright idea that they should get to the cause and not to the symptom. And they started taking the people with the highest incidence of asthma and going into their apartments. This with light variation. It's in all over, many different apartments, and discovering that there were mold and there were other irritants that were creating the asthma. And they found that it was cheaper to go into those apartments and renovate them, actually eliminate the mold, eliminate the water leaks, paint them with non-toxic low VOC paints, than it was to have them coming to the emergency room. But the other intended side effect was by getting all those asthma patients out of the emergency room, it freed the emergency room up for more life-threatening diseases. So it took stress off the emergency room and allowed it to serve its purpose better.
Thanks, Jonathan. I'm going to segue right into a story. You just gave me an idea. I'm going to show another clip that I hadn't planned on showing. So the idea of energy efficiency saving lives is what was just talked about.
I was not a big believer in global warming, but you can only read so many reports, so much science. You know, I live in Florida, and I was going to say drill, drill, drill. But now, as I know more about this, I think that if oil is the problem, maybe more oil is not the answer.
At 300,000 barrels a day, the Department of Defense is one of the world's biggest users of oil. Getting that fuel to the front lines is incredibly expensive. In dollars, but more importantly, in blood.
When you're moving large convoys of thin-skinned vehicles transporting fuel, our enemies clearly understand how critical that is to us, and that is what they will attack.
We have to find ways to, as one Marine general likes to say, unleash ourselves from the tether of fuel.
A third of the Army's wartime fuel use is to run generator sets to make electricity. In a typical forward operating base recently examined, 95% of that electricity went to air-condition inefficiently tents sitting in a very hot, sandy place.
And really what we're doing is we're air conditioning the desert.
So we're getting people blown up in fuel convoys to deliver the fuel to be wasted in that way. Just connect the dots, and obviously there's something wrong with this picture.
We looked at what was currently available in terms of adding liners to tents and that sort of things, and then one of the folks on my team came up with the idea of spray foam insulation. This looks like a tent. The only difference, it doesn't move at all. Essentially, you've got a big igloo cooler here.
By foaming tents, we go from a 50-ton cooling unit down to a 8-ton cooling unit, which reduces our power consumption tremendously. We figured that within approximately 10 months, we will pay for everything. So we're actually saving soldiers' lives, giving a more comfortable place to stay, and saving money and saving the environment all in that one fell swoop.
I've met a lot of people from the military, both when we were filming, afterwards, in the last 3 years that I've been on the road with the film, promoting it. And many of them have come home, A, knowing that they just fought a resource war, and B, they're now in renewable energy. Huge. I bet you there could be a whole business study at Harvard in the MBA program to study military personnel who are now in renewable energy. That says a lot to me right there. And the military's pushing this. You know, it's not perfect. But what's happening now is, okay, we've got a forward operating base using less fuel. How about a forward operating base using no fuel? And so they're really pushing lightweight, portable solar. The wind turbines they thought about, but those also give your location away pretty easily. So they've moved a little bit away from that. But they're really working on solar. They're also working on getting every military base in the U.S. to be net zero energy, waste, and water. And they're in competition with each other. Fort Bliss is in competition with Fort Irwin, and Fort Irwin's in competition with Fort Knox. And that's the kind of competition in the military I like. And that's the kind of spending in the military that I like. Because all that technology we get, you all know that, the microchip, GPS, mammograms, all sorts of things, integration, all came from the military at an institutional level. And so I'm going to continue filming. I've already started filming with the military. I haven't found the right character yet, and so we're still hunting. Dan Nolan, the fella in this, he's out of the business now. He's retired from the military, and he's now working on this really interesting concept of having one person, one vote in the United States. He's working on that. He thinks it's neat, and it could be cool. And I'm all for it. I think he's a good man. One of the things that Amory Lovins said about military and history, you can see this is not a new problem. In the Civil War, even though there were trains starting up, most of it was still using animals to move things. And half of the supplies on a mule train was food for the mules. So it's not a new situation. It's just a different form of fuel, basically. So, as you heard a story from Jonathan, does anyone have a short story that they could tell that would make an interesting movie, perhaps, short film, that they could bring to this? I don't know how many people read what we were hoping to achieve tonight, but to open it up, to get stories going both ways without just me yakking. Phil, okay, good.
There are lots of them, so this is a very short one, but it's one of my favorites. It's from several years ago, back when Hickenlooper, now governor, was mayor, and Denver decided to switch out most of their traffic lights to LEDs, and they put the savings from the electricity that they would have been using and the maintenance of those lights into a fund for homeless housing, for sort of high service-oriented housing for formerly homeless people. So I love that story.
I'm going to add one for you. I've been telling this story. He spoke, it's one of the nightmares of being on a panel. Everyone's probably had this moment where you're about to speak in a panel and everyone in the room that you want to hear you is there, and then a guy who's running for governor in Colorado shows up and they give him your spot where you've flown all the way from Louisville to Denver to then Aspen. I had the conversation with the guy on the plane, so at least I got that much out of it. But Hickenlooper told this following story, which was during the downturn, it was so clear that they were going to have to fire people because the tax base just plummeted in Denver when he was mayor. And so he didn't want to fire anyone, so he called everyone in City Hall together and said, I don't want to fire anyone. Anybody have any ideas? Janitor raises his hand and says, I got one. How about right now you have the janitorial crews coming in at 5 and 6 o'clock at night, and we're working until midnight, 1 or 2. What if you bring us in at 2 in the afternoon, we do all the quiet stuff while you're there, and then around 6 we do the loud stuff, and maybe we'll be done by 8. So what's that mean if we don't have the HVAC and lighting going from 8 p.m. to 2 a.m., or that way for you guys? And they did the numbers, and no one got fired. And now that's actually a term, it's called day shifting. Is that accurate? You're my building guy. And so day shifting, it's now happening. And so I always think about the unintended benefits. And one of them, I would think, would be that the families now get to see their kids at night before they go to bed, and they get to see their kids in the morning. And, other than a couple disgruntled teenagers, I think that's probably going to be a good idea. And that leads me right into another clip I'm going to show that has the unintended benefit idea. And I'm going to say something before this. This film was made possible by a law written by Ann Richards, but signed by George W. Bush.
For Roscoe, I guess we bottomed out when we lost our Dairy Queen.
Oh yeah, that's the kiss of death for a small town. When your Dairy Queen closes down, you're on your last leg.
But about that time, our wind industry came along, and it's been a fantastic, unbelievable boom to Roscoe.
Roscoe's got what will end up being, for a little while at least, the largest wind farm in the world, and there are 400 landowners in this area that are sharing in the benefit of that project.
The landowners get paid on the actual amount of electricity generated. Their payment is a straight royalty, and this is the only time they've ever had a chance to receive a steady income.
The thing that's really cool, you talk to a lot of the families that raised kids here, and you find out that a large percentage of them have children moving back to this area because of the wind industry.
Vicki Haynes really benefited from this wind farm. I hope you'll include her. She's a lot better looking than I am.
This is our daughter and our little grandson that it brought home, and my son-in-law and our little grandson. So Dan's the one working with the wind turbines, and it's just been a blessing.
Farmers really do appreciate these things. This is strictly dry land. We sit here and pray for rain and cuss the wind. Now what we've been cussing all these years turned out to be a blessing.
So those farmers didn't get literally killed by the drought. I think we're in third year in Texas right now. I know the drought's eased up in the upper Mississippi because they had income from those turbines. You know, and that's just one guy who had a bunch of neighbors with small holdings. They couldn't get 10,000 acres together like this ranches to his south where he was watching all these wind developments happen. So he got everybody together, made them one entity, did a contract with Aon Energy, and created the world's largest wind farm. And until about a year and a half ago, it was the world's largest wind farm. And again, those unintended benefits, that grandmother now gets to spend time with her grandchild. You know, I don't know how to quantify that. I just know my own personal experience, which is I got to spend a lot of time with my grandmother when I was a kid, up and through teenage years and into my 20s. And I can tell you that I'm here in front of you because of her influence on me, the kind of woman she was and the kind of person, you know, the kind of community person she was. So I love these unintended benefits, these things that just get better and better and better. Mitch, you want to tell a short version of what you were telling me about Malawi?
We just took a bunch of evangelical leaders to Malawi because one of the things, and you'll hear more about this, but the story is we had a man whose actually father is president of the American Bible Association. His son is working on his PhD and was not a believer in climate change until he stood in a river that up to 10 years ago flowed 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and was the largest source of protein for this village. And now it is a dry piece of sand, except when floods. And standing there with the villagers looking at them, and I think even the most thing the villagers say, and this is the real impact story, I think, for Malawi, they have 1 million cases of HIV/AIDS. But they have 15 million residents, and each one is impacted by climate change.
It's just, you know, obviously it's better if everyone is in agreement on what's happening right now. Clearly, for me, climate change is definitely happening right now. But I've talked to so many people who are very smart and engaged and in good positions of power who aren't buying it. You know, I don't want to cut them out because they're still smart and they still care they like clean air, they like clean water, whatever. So my goal is to find the common ground. And I can tell you in all my conversations, and I've had a lot of them, a lot of one-on-one conversations between people who are usually dragged to one of my screenings and then happy they had gotten there, which is good. And, you know, I say, hey, climate change is real, science is strong, it's happening, and the things that will solve it will make life on Earth better for everybody. What do you think? And I've discovered that that's the magic moment. When someone like me asks someone like them, what do you think? They are so used to someone like me telling them that they're an idiot. And I know from my experience, if someone calls me an idiot, I'm not really wanting to listen to anything else they have to say. Even if they were right about something, I still don't want to hear it. And that's what I found over and over and over and over again is if you just have that little moment of, hey, what do you think? And they're going to say something akin to climate change is a hoax, Al Gore is a fraud, and all the teachers and folks in colleges are studying it because that's where the grant money is. I'll say, okay, I can't do anything with that. And I'm not going to change your opinion about climate change right now, am I? And they say, no, you're not. And I say, and you're not going to change my opinion, are you? And they say, no, I'm not. So now we're having this old-time senatorial, we're going to go play golf together, but we vote on bills differently kind of moment. We're actually smiling at this point. And it's a neat moment, because when you feel someone doesn't like you or really judges you, it hurts. It's irritating. It takes a lot of energy, and you don't want to be around that moment, that situation. So you avoid it. I avoid it. But what I'm finding is that's an artificial thing that's happening in our country. It's a construct. And I believe it's created by the political industrial complex. I think there's a lot of media involved in it, and I think there's a lot of people who make a lot of money when people don't get along. But when you break it down and you talk to people one at a time, I'm finding that there's a huge majority of Americans who want what I'm hoping we'll get, which is a low-carbon economy. They just don't know it, and they wouldn't put it in those terms. But when you ask, when I have this one-on-one conversation, I say, hey, we're going to table climate change. What do you think about solar energy? And they love solar energy. And 90% of Americans want solar energy. And you say, what do you think about wind? And they love wind. And 70% of Americans, according to Google, Google's working on a whole eastern seaboard offshore wind program. Their studies show that 70% of Americans not only want wind, but will pay more for it. And then I say, what do you think of geothermal? And they don't really understand it, and everyone's confused by it because there's two types. There's the heat pump, and there's the stuff up in Alaska, and they like it, but they don't know why, and I have no stats to back that up anyway. And then I say, what do you think of energy efficiency? And they think it's a no-brainer. And I'm talking, these are like 60, 70, 80% numbers. In the United States, let me give you an example of what that is. Reagan beat Mondale in '84, 58 to 42%. I'm not going to talk about the Electoral College because the way that worked, but it was 58% of Americans voted for Reagan, 42% voted for Mondale, and that was called a landslide. But only 1 out of 4 Americans who could vote voted. So Reagan won with about 16% of Americans in a landslide. And we're seeing numbers in the 60s and 70s and 80% of people wanting clean energy. They're just not organized. They're not led. But they want it. And that, I mean, to me, the idea is very difficult if I have to change people's minds. But it's really cool when you find out you don't have to change people's minds. You just have to help make people aware of what they think is what I think and what you think, and it's okay. That's my discovery with what we've been doing and why I still have so much focus on moving forward, because there's the need to get this told. This is important because it's happening. It's our reality. Yes, sir.
This is a fact that most people don't know, but last year in Iowa's electricity, 24.5% of it came from wind.
Yeah.
It's a quarter of all the power, all the electricity generated in the state of Iowa is from wind. And the reason for that is back when there were a bunch of progressives, in 1983 we passed the first RPS, Renewable Portfolio. We didn't even know what the word was at the time. More progressive legislation happens in 1990, but then all the progressives leave, but the idea doesn't. And so it's pretty much a Republican governor, Republican House, 1 vote in the Senate. They pass even stronger legislation, and all of a sudden we go from nothing to 24.5%. And it'll be 27% this year because we now have 5,000 megawatts, 5 nuclear power plants worth of wind power in the state of Iowa.
And that's tremendous.
But it was done both by progressives and by people who just wanted to make some money.
Yeah, and I didn't say everything I think about the country and it not being polarized. I do think that Washington is polarized. I see a lot of state houses as incredibly polarized, but it's the people that aren't polarized. I'm getting ready to go to Arizona And they have a public utility commission that's actually elected. And 3 or 4 years ago, everyone on that commission was a Republican with a Republican governor. And they voted to really boost the renewable portfolio standard, and obviously it's going to be solar. And so they hit their solar goals like that, because it's Arizona. And now the new commission is like trying to stop it and pull back and water it down. They're not even representing the Republicans in their state. It's gone so far off. And so this is Republicans telling me the story of how they're not being represented by the elected officials in their own state. And as it was told to me by a woman who was a Republican on that elected commission, who voted for solar 4 years ago and now doesn't know who's on that commission, Sun City, it's this retirement community to the west and a little bit north of Phoenix, very conservative. And if you went in there and said, we're going to pull out your solar or we're going to start pulling it back, you would get shot. They absolutely will kill you if you try to get in the way of them and their solar power. So it's a disconnect. But yeah, that makes perfect sense. Yes, sir?
You know, the curious part of this conversation, though, because we're all smart and we're unique and most of us are probably pretty liberal, is if you live in New England now, it's almost impossible to cite a wind project because there's a small group of people that all voted for Al Gore who use nothing science, and have scared every community to death, and they've painted a picture that isn't based the least bit. I mean, there are issues. You don't want to have a wind generator next to your house, but it's hysterical. It's hysteria. And I watch good friends of mine in the communities that I work in and live in that have organized and ended wind. I've watched very smart places like Amherst, Massachusetts, full of very smart people who refuse to put solar collectors, 2 megawatt project in their landfill for the glare that it would cause a professor's house. You watch battles now about putting solar arrays because we don't want to look at them. So part of that 30% that Google has found is actually very smart, very thoughtful, very liberal, people that vote for Al Gore, and they're full of shit. And it's really, you know, we sit and have a debate between the closed minds of Tea Partiers. Well, who are my neighbors that are like this?
Yeah, I think again, it's clearly a storytelling problem. I have one regret. I actually, at a Kentucky Derby breakfast, I sat next to, I guess, RFK Jr. He's in the NRDC. I didn't bring up the Cape Wind story with him, to just call him out. That's my biggest regret, because I was trying to be polite, because I was invited by somebody else and all that stuff. I mean, it's just pure hypocrisy. So that story needs to be told, right? So we just need to keep telling stories. Get them out there, get them out there, get them out there. Everything you said is true. Yes, ma'am.
Your film is great. I've shown it on campus and in the classroom, and the students really like it. And I was just going to follow on. There is actually a really great film called Cape Spin. Mm-hmm. I don't know how many of you have seen it, that really looks at how science can be manipulated by both sides. And it's a lot about NIMBY, and it's a lot about the Kennedy family really standing hard in opposition to the Cape Wind project. So I would recommend that one in addition to Carbon Nation.
Awesome. I'll check that out.
Hey, Peter. I'm over here.
Yep.
So, if I could say one thing. Your point, I can't see far enough to read your name, but your point is actually back to what I was talking about, is that scientists as a group, the science-trained people, look at data and make these decisions based on data. Everybody else makes the decisions on things other than data. There's a lot of personal things going on. My dad, who is a very smart person, he's 87, is a living encyclopedia of gas prices. You cannot ride down the road with him without, as you go by each gas station, having a dissertation on the price of gas there today is this, last week it was this, and then the list of every gas station within 10 miles. He will drive 10 miles in each direction to save 1 penny per gallon on a 20-gallon tank. Okay? I've given up. I've tried to explain it. I've done the math. He doesn't care. He wants the cheapest gas there is. Okay? And so this is the whole thing about this storytelling and this narrative, is that we can't just keep throwing out things about carbon's here and we're doing this and we're doing that and expect people to respond. We have to look at how people respond to a story, which is where Peter's kind of thing comes in.
I'm just going to sort of round it out. Do you have a quickie? Okay.
Maybe it's the old keep your friends close and your enemies closer. And maybe it's time that while we're being really kind and polite to those that we oppose, it's time to call our good friends, as you call them, out on their bullshit more often. Okay. Risk some social ostracism every once in a while, you know what I mean? Rather than just letting that kind of thing go on. And I'll give you my real quickie one, which was on Facebook, right? Facebook is just full of craziness. A friend posted a crazy looking picture of a frankenfish and was worried about potential, it just said frankenfish coming to a stream near you. And I thought it was the snakehead. And I said, I'm going to look this up and see what's going on. It was a made-up picture about a made-up problem, about something that could potentially happen. And I'm like, you know what? There are problems right now, right, that are happening, apocalyptic level happening. And we need to focus on those rather than risk inflammatory rhetoric to create new fake problems for people to worry about with fake pictures.
Right.
And again, it was a friend. So maybe calling out those friends and being nice to our enemies is the solution.
Well, I'll segue to that, and I'll tie it up. It's a little bit of a detailed story, but just on your thing there, I mean, you know, wars have been made on less, right? What was it? You give me the war, I'll show you the pictures, you give me the war, something like that, Hearst. So, there's a solution that I've been studying since we made Carbonation, and I've been deep, deep, deep into the research of it right now, and I'm just more and more and more and more excited, intrigued. And the basic concept is, well, how many people saw the Alan Savory talk, the TED Talk? Okay. I highly recommend seeing the Alan Savory TED Talk. Within a week, 500,000 people had seen it. So check it out. Bottom line, Alan Savory's concept is that the way we graze our cattle in the meat industry, everyone knows that the UN just came out with a thing 3 years ago that says that cattle are 20% of the world's emissions. Well, be careful with those 20% studies, because if you add them all up, it's 300% is what I've kind of come up with. Because they're double and triple and quadruple counting. Transportation's 19% worldwide. Well, part of that 20% for cattle is transportation. Deforestation is 20% worldwide, but part of that number for cattle is deforestation. Now, that being said, the way we've been doing our farming and our cattle, our industrial grazing has been really, really bad. Soils in a natural state are between 5, 10, 15% carbon. Most of the carbon in the US right now is about 1, 2, 3% carbon. It's the biggest export we have. And more carbon's been put into the atmosphere from the agricultural community in the last 150 years than anything industrial. It's a big deal, but there's an amazing solution. In a nutshell, if we replicate the way bison were in the Great Plains, big herds being hunted, high intensity, they're really tight, they're really packed, and they're eating, pooping, and pissing and everything right away. Then they're hunted, so they move on. So they won't be back at that piece of ground for a year. So if you replicate that on farms, on ranches, and you just pen them in these little paddocks, get them there for 2 hours or a day, shift them, and make sure they don't get back to that land for at least 120 days, sometimes 365 days, the soil turns back on quickly, hugely quickly. And there's all sorts of other details, and if you want to pull me aside, boy, oh boy, do I have the data and the stuff, and I'm really digging into this stuff. But we're talking numbers that actually can slow climate change. It's crazy, but the trick right now is all the farmers that are doing this are seeing their land just turn back on. They're seeing their soil fill with carbon. They're seeing the biome in their soil taking off. You have 80,000 different organisms in a handful of healthy soil. And in numbers, there's more organisms in a handful of soil than the number of humans that have ever lived. I mean, it's a world that the most sophisticated soil scientists right now will gladly say they know 1% of what's going on in there. And a decade ago, they would have told you they knew 10%. But now they're like, we know 1%. Isn't that awesome? That's how they are right now, because they're being very humble and excited. So it's a whole ecosystem. And actually, our bodies are a whole ecosystem, too. I think it's something like 90% of the DNA in us is not us. You know, everyone's talking about we need more community. Well, we are community, right? And how we feed all those other entities works really well when we have all those entities working in our soil, getting all the minerals back. So you actually can have a steak that's a health food when it's grass-fed and grass-finished. It's high in omega-3. That's why we want organic milk. It's the exact same thing, high in omega-3. So imagine if McDonald's or any fast food beef burger place says we're only going to use grass-finished beef in our products. They'll create their main product will become a health food, and they'll help slow down climate change. And the research that I'm doing right now is, can they make money doing it? And there's a lot of reasons to think they can, because the biggest expense for finishing cattle on corn and all the medical stuff that we put into them is all that corn is very expensive, and it's tied to fuel, and it's only going up. So I'm working with oil companies now because they need carbon capture and sequestration more than anyone. They're spending billions of dollars trying to find a mechanical way to do it. It won't work. It won't work. And anyone honest in the oil industry will tell you it's not going to work. They would have to create an industry 1/5 the size of the existing oil industry just to do the theory of capturing the carbon and sequestering it in the ground. 1/5 of the size that it is right now just to do that. But the carbon, the soils, the ranching is doing it. And it's $500 million years of R&D. So this is where we are right now in our filming and our convening, and it's fascinating. And there's a couple people in the oil industry that are right on board with this. So the trick is scientists study systems like singular things. Show me how this works, give me a control, and then show me how this doesn't work. But the ranchers who are doing these holistic management techniques, it's complicated. It's 80 different types of grass are now popping up in their land. They can't study that. So now we're thinking, why don't we just study on the other side of the fence of the guys who are doing this holistic management? Let's just study their neighbor who won't do it and at least get an idea, because it's just the other side of the fence. Same rainfall, same land, same everything. And so it's all new. It's all happening. And so if anyone wants to talk to me about that as I'm here, we're looking for brains, we're finding brains, and there's a few people here already that are onto this. But this is the thing that gets me to sleep at night, knowing that this is a possibility and that we need the big evil folks. Imagine Walmart saying we only want grass-fed steaks. Game over, in a good way, in a very good way. Then all the folks who are working on renewable energy will actually come in, get the clean energy thing going so we can have clean air, clean water. It's pretty cool. It's very cool. So, thank you.